Alright guys, it's story time once again. As some of you might already know, I grew up as a conspiracy-obsessed fundamentalist Christian in Texas. Then I went to an evangelical Christian university, also in Texas, but in East Texas, which is the more conservative part than the part that I grew up in. A little fun fact, all of the graduates from my university got this little statue as a graduation gift. It is Jesus washing a guy's feet, but it's not made very well. Like the Jesus face and the guy's face are the same face. So it's like Jesus washing Jesus's feet. I am just glad I got the diploma, not the statue. And for those who are wondering what this was in the thumbnail, this is my medal for graduating cum laude, which it is the lowest honor one can get. This is where I met my wife, Taylor, who has her own YouTube channel you should be subscribed to, and this is where I began my deconstruction process. Right after graduation, I left Christianity. So if you've ever wondered what it's like to go to a relatively average evangelical Christian university, this is a good video for you to watch. And yes, we will be talking about demons some more in this video because, as it turns out, it's not just fundamentalists who are kind of obsessed with them. A quick shout out to my patrons on Patreon who got an extended version of this video with even more stories, and they actually got it early. Thank you guys. All right, let's start out talking about classes. The first thing that you need to know here is that this was not a Bible college. This was a fully accredited university with regular academic programming for the most part. You did not go to this school for ministry training. You went there because you wanted to go into business or especially scientific fields. For aviation, which is what my wife went there for, this school is actually highly respected, on par with a school like Embry-Riddle. Still, they managed to make the university experience very, very Christian by the way they shaped classroom time and student life. I'm going to talk about classes first because the student life stuff, I think, is a little too spicy to put this early on in the video without the YouTube restriction bot doing its thing. My first Bible class. No matter what degree plan you were on at my school, you had to get at least 12 credit hours of Bible-related classes to be able to graduate. So everyone that graduated from my university essentially had the equivalent of a minor in Bible. In the order that I took them, I took biblical literature, biblical foundations, Old Testament, and poetical books. That is also the descending order of how much I like them. Poetical books, actually awesome. Biblical literature, ugh. To understand this next part, you've got to understand that I entered college as a fundamentalist Christian. I was a super literalist in every way when it came to the Bible, and this school was a non-denominational, just generically evangelical university, which meant that it was actually more liberal than me. In just my second week of freshman year, my biblical literature professor started a discussion in class about whether or not the snake who tempted Eve in the Garden of Eden was Satan or just a talking snake. I had never heard anyone ever bring up this idea before, even though the biblical literature professor was correct that it does not say anywhere in Genesis that the serpent was Satan or the devil. I was shocked and mortified and disgusted that even at this supposedly Christian university, such despicable things were being said in Bible class, of all places. Naturally, I spoke up in class. The teacher asked, well, why are we concluding that this was Satan? You guys give me your reasons. Why do you think that this was Satan? And I raised my hand, like very firmly, and was like, because if it's not Satan, then it's just a talking snake. And he could feel my anger, as could the rest of the class. Although I think there were a lot of people in class that probably kind of were with me in being offended. He kind of just responded with, all right, okay. I don't really remember what happened from there, probably because I like blacked out from fury, right? Later, to my shame, I became so upset by this that I went to a school administrator. I don't remember exactly what their position was, but I went to a school administrator and tattled on the teacher for heresy. This was my first month at college. I was doing great already, right? Naturally, nothing came of this. The person that I tattled to actually thought it was really weird that the Bible professor was saying that, because he also was like a young earth creationist who thought the serpent was Satan. But you can't get the guy in trouble for starting a theological discussion or a literary discussion in a theological and literary class like this. Like, that's what the class was for. I admit it, teacher who I did not actually like for reasons I'll get into, you were right. I'll give you that one. So yeah, later on, I found different reasons to not like this teacher very much. He was extremely tough, and I found that the only way to get a decent grade on any homework assignment or essay or whatever it was really to just agree with him. So much for open discussion, right? At some point, we were assigned to write a brief essay about the fall of man and specifically deliberate on whose fault the fall of man was. So whose fault was it that sin entered the world because Adam and Eve both ate the fruit in the Garden of Eden? I figured, okay, this guy likes to talk pretty negatively about women in class. I suspect that he wants me to say that it was the woman's fault. So while I was not taught that it was woman's fault, I was taught that Adam and Eve shared blame. If anything, it was actually Adam's fault, more so because the man is the head of the house. But I decided I'm going to write that Eve was to blame. It wasn't the serpent. It wasn't Adam. It's woman's fault, and that's why women are cursed. I wrote this essay, and it was probably the best grade on any assignment that I turned in that entire semester in that class. So after that, I decided, all right, if I want to get a decent grade in this class, I'm just going to have to agree with him on everything. So that's what I did, and my grade improved, and I did not end up actually being persuaded by his brand of misogyny. I held on to my own. Conversion therapy discussions in counseling classes. I originally went to this university for engineering, and when I discovered that I hate engineering and I actually care a lot more about studying human beings, I decided to do psychology, specifically counseling psychology. So that's what I ended up getting my degree in. In sophomore year, I began taking one of my very first counseling-specific classes, and this was an online class where every week we had to engage in discussion with our fellow classmates in kind of a forum style. We had to make a set number of original posts about a certain prompt, and we had to reply to other people who also made posts about the teacher's prompt. The first part of the course was all about ethics in therapy, talking about things like power dynamics and setting boundaries, all really good stuff that is foundational to understanding what the therapeutic practice even is for. One week, the teacher's prompt for our online discussion was, what would you do as a state-licensed therapist of the Christian faith if a gay or transgender client came to you seeking care which affirms their lifestyle? Now, from what I had picked up in class so far, I came to my answer pretty quickly, and I thought that it was going to be the majority's answer in the class. I said I would refer the client to someone else, as my Christian convictions could interfere with a therapeutic relationship. A therapist is not there to condemn a person for their identity or try to persuade them out of it, and since I disagreed with homosexuality, I was just not a good fit for such a client. Interestingly, I actually grew up thinking that being trans was fine from a Christian perspective. The reason being, I had only ever heard of trans people on a TLC show that I watched one time, where the person was painted in a very sympathetic light, and there was a very medicalizing perspective taken. So I saw being trans as like this kind of mental disorder that, okay, the treatment for that is just to affirm them. I do not see it that way today. See my videos on gender affirming care. It's not a medical issue. It's just diversity in the human population. My parents and people in my church never, to my knowledge, talked about the existence of trans people. So I just had no reason to think that trans people were any kind of problem. Like, why would I? Anyway, I was quite confused when I started hearing in this class that people saw being trans in the same way that like I was taught to view gay people, that it's an abomination unto God. So in my discussion prompt, I wrote that I would also refer a trans client seeking an affirming approach because I just didn't really know what to think of the topic all of a sudden, and a confused therapist is not a good therapist. How wild is it that for a moment in time when I was a sophomore in college, I was a fundamentalist evangelical Christian who would have provided gender-affirming therapy had I not been persuaded out of it. The teacher gave me a good grade on this post, so I guess she thought it was a thoughtful enough of a response to, give me a decent grade. But when I went and checked other people's responses in my class, I realized that I was the only person to say anything so nuanced. I was shocked to read that the majority of my classmates posted something along the lines of, I would immediately tell them that being gay or transgender is an abomination unto God and that they must repent of their sin of homosexuality. I would attempt to change them by the presentation of the gospel without fear and shame. Several of these posts in a class, like in a class environment, were written in all caps with a lot of exclamation points. People were angered by even having to talk about queer people, and these people were trying to train to be therapists. Effectively, the majority of my classmates in this online class who were studying to be therapists advocated for conversion therapy and planned on carrying it out after they got their degree. I have no idea what kind of grades they got. Maybe they didn't get good grades on this assignment, given that I differed from them and I got, I think, like 100 on this. Regardless of the outcome, kind of a terrifying thing to look back on. With how passionately my classmates advocated for conversion therapy, I am not surprised whenever I hear evangelical Christians brazenly advocate for it in a political way. It's actually kind of a big deal in evangelical culture to cry persecution when your state bans conversion therapy for minors, which is known to be abusive. There's a therapist who is Christian in Colorado right now who sued state officials in September 2022, alleging the conversion ban violates her First Amendment rights. She identifies as a Christian who wants to provide counseling services to adult and minor clients who may question or wish to explore their sexual orientation and gender identity. Speaking as someone with a counseling psychology degree and an understanding of the laws surrounding therapeutic practice, I can tell you, you can already explore sexual orientation and gender identity with clients. You just can't provide a service intended to change those things about a client because it's well understood to be both ineffective and extremely dangerous. The district court then denied the motion, but the therapist then appealed to the Supreme Court. Fortunately, the Freedom from Religion Foundation was able to send a friend of the court brief to the Supreme Court, which explains why the Christian therapist has no case and that her appeal should be dismissed. I'll link that in the description. It's a worthwhile read. Yet again, FFRF steps up to defend human rights at the highest levels of power. Especially today, we really need nonprofits like this national state church watchdog to step up and protect Americans from the religious privileging that Christian nationalists are trying to enact. I have proudly been a member of FFRF for 7 years now because they consistently stand up for human rights and fight religious overreach in our government. Go become a member right now to support their expert legal team. The link is in the description and pinned comment. FFRF's 48th annual convention is happening October 16th to 19th in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I've been to their conventions many times, and it's always an illuminating and energizing experience, so go get your tickets right now. Thank you so much for sponsoring this video, FFRF. I am thrilled to work with an organization who cares about the separation of church and state as much as my community and I do. Everyone that's watching, y'all go click the link below to become a member right now. Devotionals in every class. Another way our academic experience was heavily Christianized was that we were required to have devotionals at the start of every single class. So prayer and scripture reading, sometimes more, in every single class period. They were supposed to last 5 minutes and no more. But sometimes they went way over. Every teacher did it a little bit differently, and most kept it pretty brief. My calculus teacher, though, if you took calculus at my school, you already know what I'm talking about. She used it as an opportunity to rant about her own personal life. And I would say her average time taking up in the devotionals at the beginning of every 50-minute class period, 3 times a week, was 20 to 30 minutes. Sometimes most of the class was just the devotional, which had nothing to do with God and everything to do with her being upset about things. The students in her classes notoriously had trouble with the homework and got poor grades, which she somehow was baffled by every semester, it seemed. Obviously, the reason was because she did not devote the majority of the class time to teaching calculus. It was so bad that I, along with a bunch of other people, ended up dropping her class, and luckily I was able to take calculus online from a different teacher. Math is not my strongest subject, but as my favorite professor could tell you, in statistics and research methods where we had to do tons of math, I did fine when things were actually explained to me, unlike with this. So Taylor also took this professor for some math class, and what would you say the things that she complained about in the 20 to 30 minute devotionals were?
I feel like it was mostly about her mom.
Yeah, her mom developing dementia.
Living in a small town, because she lived like 45 minutes north of where the college was, which was like, our college was already in a really small town, but that was even a smaller town.
But she was actually very proud of coming from the very small town, which is kind of the main thing that we liked to quote. We still quote her sometimes to this day, because I can't tell you how many times we had to hear, "I'm just a small town girl." Taylor will be back later in the video. Biology classes did not teach evolution. In sophomore year, I took an introductory biology class, and I was very curious going into it how this professor would handle evolution, given how liberal my first ever Bible professor was. In one of our first class periods, the professor introduced to us Carl Linnaeus, who was a Christian and the father of modern taxonomy. We were taught his taxonomic system and told that this is the way we would classify all life in this class. We were told that we didn't need evolution to understand how all life was related, and that we could instead understand this as Linnaeus did. All life has features and structures in common because they share a creator in common. And so we, for an entire semester, stuck to a taxonomic system that was created in the 1700s. After this class did not attempt to have any kind of conversation with evolution. It did not attempt to debunk it in any way. We just didn't talk about it at all, and we studied life in its current form as it is, assuming it had always been this way, and we just did not speak about how life changed over time or whether or not it even could. As a result, this was the most boring science class I have ever taken in my entire life. I usually really like science classes. This is the only one I've ever taken in my life that I did not very much enjoy. All we did was memorize features of organisms and their functions. It was like memorizing a phone book. I think this was so awful because there was no central structure or theory uniting all of the things we were just memorizing, so it felt kind of pointless. This was like taking an art class where instead of learning anything about the context or history or philosophy or expression wrapped up in art pieces, you just instead looked at pictures of paintings and memorized what colors and materials were used in them. Consequently, this is the only science class that I have ever taken in my life where I got less than an A. I think I got a C in this class, which, like, that was a pretty bad grade for me because I took my grades pretty seriously. My university was considered a STEM school more than anything, but importantly, it did not offer any kind of advanced classes or degrees in biology. Okay, this is probably what you guys clicked on this video to hear about. Let's talk about sexuality and student life. Being an evangelical school, there were some serious rules about student conduct, especially revolving around sexuality. To keep it extremely brief and not go over the majority of the rules, dorms were separated by sex. We had open dorms on certain hours on certain days of the week, which meant guys could enter girls' rooms and girls could enter guys' rooms. And the doors had to remain open, lights had to remain on, view of everyone's hands was to be unobscured. I remember that one. And your RA had to check in on every room in the entire dorm every 15 minutes to make sure there was no shenanigans. You could not share blankets with anyone, anytime, anywhere on campus. No co-ed dancing was allowed unless it was choreographed and approved for a school-approved event like a talent show. Obviously, no sex was allowed on campus. You could be put under like academic suspension for this, but also you were not allowed to have sex off campus if you were not married, which was hard to enforce, but people did regularly face so many academic penalties for having sex on campus that a lot of us took this really seriously. Of course, the true Christians among us took it seriously because having premarital sex is a sin. It almost goes without saying that no LGBTQ relationships or expression of any kind were allowed. Basically, anything other than very vanilla monogamous sex after a Christian marriage was considered sinful and was heavily stigmatized, if not actually punished. These rules and this stigma resulted in some interesting situations. The confession wall. I told this story in a video a while back, so I'm going to include a clip from that video and then add to it afterward. One semester during my junior year of college, I believe, some student body activity council or something like that turned this big wall on campus, usually used for flyers, into a confession wall. It was meant to be a fun, non-serious thing where students could write funny confessions on a Post-it note and stick it on the wall. On the day the confession wall started, I put a confession up there, which I'm pretty sure was a quote from SpongeBob.
The inner machinations of my mind are an enigma.
I went back the next day to check out the wall, and it turned out that people from married housing on campus had found the wall, and things had gotten pretty rough. There were a lot of confessions up there expressing serious personal and marital problems, all related to sex. I hate having sex with my spouse. I still feel so ashamed of my body and sexuality. How in the world do they expect us to bury our sexuality and then just flip a switch one day and not feel guilty about having sex? It doesn't work. I feel so much shame and pressure during sex that I can't perform, and it's hurting my relationship. I always thought that since God blesses sex in marriage, I would want to have sex with my husband once we got married. It's been a year, and I think I just have to accept the fact that I'm not attracted to men in the first place. I wish I realized that before marrying him. This was pretty disturbing to read, as you might imagine, and when I went back to read more on the third day, every confession had been removed and the usual flyers were back up. By senior year, when many people my age were getting engaged and married, I didn't have to hear these stories from a confession wall. Friends and friends of friends circulated them by word of mouth around campus, lamenting their situation and crying out for help. Yeah, the level of trauma that our shame-ridden view of sexuality caused was just absurd. Another confession I remember reading was, a person said they wished they hadn't watched porn as a teenager because if they hadn't, they wouldn't have been so traumatized as to become a lesbian. Lots of evangelicals think that watching porn at any age is necessarily traumatic, and way more evangelicals think that being LGBT is caused by trauma, especially in someone's early life. Now, being LGBT and having traumatic experiences, that is correlated. However, research that I've covered on this channel more than once actually shows that people start out queer and then the bigotry that they face causes trauma. The relationship does not go the other way around. Now, when I talk about this kind of thing on my channel, about how much trauma is caused by this sort of thinking in evangelical culture and about how it is continuing to be propagated by popular evangelicals, evangelical Christians like to respond and say, well, you grew up in a particularly legalistic environment that is not representative of evangelical Christianity, you really can't speak about any kind of systemic issue in evangelical Christianity at all. The thing is, my school was very middle of the road as far as evangelical colleges go. It was very representative of evangelical culture generally. It was not restrictive in the way that a place like Bob Jones or West Coast Bible College or PCC was. We didn't have literally different sidewalks for different genders, and we did not ban interracial relationships. I'm serious, that's a thing that lasted until the 2000s at Bob Jones. Our Christian ideas were completely mainstream in the US then, and they are probably even more so now. Evangelicals who say this just don't want to admit that their ideas cause trauma and that there are systemic problems in their culture that they do not want to be responsible for fixing. Confessional relationships. Speaking of abuse and trauma, so this was a Protestant school. We did not have priests, we did not have confessionals or any kind of formalized ritual surrounding confession, but some people did think that it was useful to form confessional relationships with peers or superiors for the sake of personal accountability. Most of the time, these were oversharing no FAP pacts. When this was done student to student, this could have negative results for sure. It could reinforce shame, make people too vulnerable in certain ways. Yeah. But I think when this was done student to faculty, like it often was, there was a lot more potential for outright abuse. I knew a student who struggled with same-sex attraction, which is evangelical speak for being gay, and he formed a confessional relationship like this with his boss, the director of my dorm building. This relationship developed so that every time this student felt attraction to a man or had any kind of sexual thought, feeling, or action, he had to go to his boss in my dorm building, go to his office, close the door behind him, and describe all of it in detail. This happened, as I understand, 2, maybe 3 times a week, every week, for 2 years. Eventually, he came out publicly and told his story, and good for him. Some people saw this as abuse, yeah, but other people at the school just outright defended it. I've said the following before on my channel. The point of these relationships is to keep young Christians trapped in a cycle of shame, where they do something that is perfectly natural. They cry out to God to fix them, to purify their mind. That does not work. They get shamed for the action even more when they inevitably do it again. And then the cycle just kind of repeats from there, and their self-esteem lowers and lowers and lowers. The inevitable result of this is trauma and even outright abuse. I talk about all of this maybe more articulately in a video I did last year in response to a gay conversion therapy curriculum for teenagers. So go check out that video. I'm actually going to talk about the guy who created that curriculum pretty soon because I became aware of him because he spoke at my school when I was there. Stay tuned for that. Getting in trouble for inappropriate behavior. This is a particularly personal one. As you guys might know, if you watch my video about why I did not fall down the alt-right pipeline, you know that I have always had a lot of platonic relationships with women when I was a kid, when I was in college, and now. This story is about that. In freshman year, I was studying in the lobby of my dorm building with one of my friends, and we were sitting on the same couch. I guess at some point I put my leg up on her lap. I didn't really think anything of it. She didn't really think anything of it. This was a platonic relationship, and this was in no way, sexual or romantic. It just wasn't something to give a lot of thought to. I guess we were just comfortable with each other because we were good friends. My resident director, the same guy who at the time was having a student report all of his sexual thoughts to him behind closed doors, then approached us and reprimanded us for what we were doing and told us to separate immediately. He asked my friend what her mom would think about what she was doing right now, and my friend was like visibly shaken. We immediately got up, left the building, and were talking. I was pretty nonchalant about it. I didn't really mind getting in trouble because I thought it was really stupid that we got in trouble. We weren't doing anything wrong. But my nonchalant attitude was something that my friend did not appreciate. She was still kind to me, but obviously quite frustrated at my response. I didn't really understand this at the time, but I soon came to realize that while we both got reprimanded, yes, she faced far more social consequences for what we did, I guess. She was made to bear far more shame because she was a woman. That's why she was frustrated that I didn't treat this as serious, because for her, this was actually serious. We stayed friends after this, although we lost touch after college, and this experience was somewhat formative in my current understanding of evangelical specific forms of misogyny. God led me to you as a pickup line. Hookup culture was way more than frowned upon at the school, so the boys had to get creative. It was pretty common for a guy to approach a girl, whether he knew her or not, and say something along the lines of, God is leading me to speak to you right now, or God told me directly that he wants us to be together. Definitely not all, but some women responded positively to this, and some even said that, oh yes, I am also feeling like God is leading us to be together. This would somewhat often lead to them sleeping together. Inevitably, the result would be the girl was terribly ashamed and was shamed by other people. And the guy, while, he faced shame from other people, would often be able to kind of come up with an excuse like, oh, I was so moved by the Holy Spirit in how much he wants us to be together that I just got a little carried away. Most of the time, people who got together under these circumstances did not stay together, and I see the overwhelmingly vast majority of the times when a man said this to a woman as an example of a man coming up with a ploy to hook up with and then dump a woman. A lot of us on campus knew this kind of thing happened, and as a result developed a kind of skepticism about people saying that they heard God talk to them or they felt moved by God. This did not necessarily make us deconstruct at the time, but I do think that it did plant a seed. We understood that being called by God could be something that a person was mistaken about and genuinely believed. This could also be something or a line that was used to manipulate other people into doing something that they would not otherwise do. I was a tattletale. All right, it's time to admit my actual shame. One time in my dorm, I saw a guy and a girl go into the guy's dorm room. They closed the door. I probably heard it lock, and then they turned up music pretty loud. Lots of rules being broken, and I didn't like this very much. I debated whether or not I should tell my RA about this, but within a few minutes, I decided that yes, I should tell him what's going on so that he can go break it up. My poor RA, I could tell he did not want to do this. Walked up to the guy's door, knocked on it, and called the guy's name a couple of times, and after several minutes, the guy opened the door. I don't know what words were exchanged, but then a couple minutes later, the guy and the girl came out of the room and walked out of the building. And then my RA was also like a victim in this, in my mind. My RA walked with just like a shame-filled and embarrassed expression back to his own room with no girl in it, and close the door. I want to say genuinely, I am sorry for being a rat here to the couple involved. You guys did not deserve to have your perfectly normal, healthy activities broken up. You were doing nothing wrong. And to my RA, I'm sorry that I forced you into the awkward experience of enforcing a rule as stupid as this one, especially because clearly the couple just left to just go complete their activities elsewhere. When you internalize these rules, it doesn't matter how arbitrary they are. They feel very real. I probably would have felt very guilty had I not ratted these people out. And that in itself is pretty messed up. Doesn't excuse me being a dick, but yeah, I'm sorry. Now, if you went to my school with me, this is probably the part that you've been waiting for. Let's talk about guests in chapel. Another way our university kept it Christian was to require all students to attend a 50-minute chapel service, basically a church service put on by the school in a giant auditorium all together with all the other students 3 times per week. If you missed more than a handful of these chapel services throughout an entire semester, you would have the credit hours that you earned that semester withheld. Basically, they would fail you regardless of your grades if you didn't go to these things most of the time. Naturally, because these services happen so often, we had to bring in outside guests, speakers, musical acts, that kind of thing, to perform in our chapel very regularly. Some of them were fine, some of them were good, but some of them were really not great. Here are some of those stories. Racist missionaries. We had this thing called Mission Emphasis Week, where missionaries who were supported or in some way affiliated with the school would come and speak in chapel, speak directly to students about their missions work, especially overseas. I remember an American missionary to Haiti coming to speak who told us all about how the Haitian people all worship demons. He told us about these scary rituals where the Haitian people would sing and dance, especially around a fire, and summon demons in that way. This missionary said he saw the demons show up firsthand. Apparently, these people would also rely on demon for their medical practices. According to him, there was no medical practice without the demon Legba. After he got done speaking, a student asked a question, and I really wish I could remember specifically what the student asked, but I remember the guy's answer being to the effect of, "No, I am very serious right now. I have really seen these things in real life. The demons are completely real. They're totally evil. They're terrifying." And I remember specifically, like it's burned into my mind, him saying, "This is so serious. All of these people will just, get together and go, 'Come on, Legba.'" I talked about this in my recent video about growing up as a fundamentalist Christian homeschooler. Yes, apparently people who are not Christian fundamentalists also believe this racist bullshit about other religions, particularly and especially those that come from Africa. My school said it took racism very seriously. After all, this was East Texas, a place with a seriously racist history that you could very easily see if you just traveled around the town. But when racism was Christianized in this way, they had no problem with it at all. Black Haitians are the descendants of African slaves who were forced onto the island to work tobacco and sugarcane plantations by European capitalists. The literal demonization of their religious practices is an ideological tool invented to justify their subjugation. It is the psychological substance of racism. If you perpetuate it, you are racist. If you take it on for religious reasons, if your religion propagates this idea, your religion is racist. It's incredibly shameful that my university outright platformed and promoted racism like this. God called me to be a missionary. Another Missions Emphasis Week story here. My wife Taylor and I met some missionaries that were visiting the school and speaking in our chapel during that Missions Emphasis Week, and we really connected with them. And the way that we met them actually made us think that God himself had orchestrated the whole thing. We ended up believing that God was calling us to be missionaries to Mormons in Utah. This was totally serious. I'm not joking or exaggerating at all here. Also, our plan for how we were going to convert Mormons to real Christianity was extremely unethical and extremely manipulative, to the point of we did question whether or not it was legal. The idea was not really our own. It was given to us by the missionaries because it's effectively what they were attempting to do and needed people's help to continue doing successfully. Taylor and I made an entire video telling this story, so I'm just going to tell you guys, it's linked in the description, and you guys are going to go have to watch that because it is way too intricate and impactful of a story to just summarize here. The ex-gay. All right, buckle up, guys. Some of you guys know what's coming. There's a lot to cover here. There was a Christian evangelist named Christopher Yuan who came and spoke at my school in chapel on the big stage in the big auditorium in 2014, I believe. Importantly, the school billed him and promoted him as being an ex-gay. He told his story about being openly gay, doing drugs, getting HIV, because this is how evangelicals present the existence of all gay people. Then he got in trouble for dealing drugs and went to prison. And in prison, he found Jesus, where he turned around his life and decided to become a Christian evangelist. In that process, he stopped being gay. After he spoke, he did some Q&A, and a student asked him, "So now that you are not gay, are you attracted to women?" And Christopher answered, "No," paused, and then moved on to the next question. I remember my fellow students and I looking around at each other, pretty confused at the answer he had just given. What was he even saying then, if he was saying that he was no longer gay, but he was not attracted to women? Years later, I think in 2020 or 2021, I made a video talking about this whole experience, and Christopher Yuan actually responded publicly on a Christian Apologist YouTube channel saying that, well, my story may not actually be true in the first place, so consider that. But he clarified that it was the school that billed him as ex-gay. He never uses that phrase to describe himself. He simply is a Christian who is no longer gay. Yuan later went on to create the Holy Sexuality Project, which was an online curriculum for Christian teenagers. Importantly, Yuan said that this project was a $1.2 million project. Just last year, I took this entire course series and exposed it for what it is, which is a disgustingly abusive piece of conversion therapy propaganda for children. That is one of the most important things I have ever made, I think, in my entire life, so I would definitely appreciate it if you guys checked out that video after you finish this one. As a follow-up to my big response video, I also made a video about how Yuan had, the day I dropped my big response, announced his engagement to a woman. I pointed out that, let's not be assholes toward them. Maybe they really do have some kind of real, genuine relationship, even if they're not having intimate relationships in that way. But I also discussed how he would inevitably use this engagement to a woman as a way to further his entire narrative that if you just follow these steps and trust God in this specific denominational way, then you can not be gay no more. Not too long after this, though, the announcement of Yuan's engagement disappeared from the internet, and all evidence of any relationship he had with this woman was completely scrubbed from all of his social media and websites, which it had previously been all over. I won't speculate because I have no idea what happened. What I do know is that Yuan quickly moved on to another transparent grift. A few months ago, he sued OpenAI for treating people of faith as second-class citizens. because Yuan's ministry was denied a $5 discount for ChatGPT. Yuan meant to use his ChatGPT subscription, which, I guess he can't afford without the $5 discount, to translate the entirety of the Holy Sexuality Project to Mandarin and to Spanish. And since his ministry is a nonprofit, he sought the typical discount OpenAI provides for nonprofits. Although OpenAI does not apparently allow any discounts for any faith-based nonprofits, regardless of the religion. Here's the juicy part of all of this. Remember how Yuan claimed that his Holy Sexuality Project was a $1.2 million project? Well, in researching this legal case, a San Diego journalist named Ken Stone discovered Christopher Yuan and his ministry's financials for the year that the Holy Sexuality Project was produced. What was Yuan's income for the year? $132,000 from ministry services, $123,000 from video and web instruction, so sales of this course, and $302,000 in donations alone. What were his entire year's expenses, including the financing of his $1.2 million project? $9,700. I am calling it, guys. I have no doubt in my mind that this guy is an all-out, complete, cynical grifter. He does not care about what he's saying. He's a grifter flat out. This is a way that he can make money, and he's lying. Oh my God. This is one of the craziest things that I've ever, broken on my channel. Stories I've covered on my channel. This guy is such a grifter. Oh my God. If you want to read more about this story in detail, go read Ken Stone's article about this in the Times of San Diego. You will notice that I am quoted very heavily in that article. Thank you for featuring me in that, Ken. By the way, there's no blowback at all to Christopher Yuan being an obvious scam artist. He didn't lose his employment at Moody Bible Institute over being an obvious hack, right? I say this all the time privately, but it's time to say it publicly. The easiest way to grift is to just tell the religious right, evangelicals in particular, what they want to hear. Being a Christian YouTuber is the easiest thing you could possibly do in the world. You don't have to have an honest bone in your body or any talent at all. It helps if you have talent, but you can make a full-time income being a total hack and loser if you just appeal to this, because they are so powerful in this country. There's my rant for the video. Cafe Anderson. I'm going to bring Taylor in for this one.
Okay, so there is this Christian musician named Cafe Anderson. He got kind of popular years and years ago because he did a Christian version of Rihanna's Umbrella. He put Christian lyrics on that song. And I actually sang that song in chapel at my high school.
Oh,
did you know
awesome.
that?
I didn't know that, actually.
Yes. Unfortunately. So when Drew and I were in college, Cafe Anderson actually came to our school to give a talk. I think he also played some of his music too, I think. But he also spoke. And while he was speaking, he talked about how the biggest struggle that he's ever had in his life was rising out of the middle class. Which I'm like, bro, if that was your biggest struggle in life, you obviously have not struggled that much.
And this was after he described that the way that he got into music was he just picked up a guitar one day and within 3 months was opening for Casting Crowns, which, if you don't know, is a very big Christian band. It was at the time. And his advice to students to succeed in life is just do what you know and God will just do the rest.
He's a very extremely lucky individual. While he was on stage, he also made this weird joke about girls having bulimia. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was like making light of girls having bulimia. And I remember feeling like really like uncomfortable with that joke.
He was like miming it and
Oh,
stuff.
really?
Yeah, no, he was.
Man,
And he did it multiple times.
Okay,
It wasn't
yeah.
just one joke.
Or I like remembered he made a joke, but I couldn't remember exactly what he said. I just remember thinking it was like really distasteful.
Yeah. So the reason why I bring Taylor in on this one is not just because she disliked Cafe Anderson at the time along with me, even when we were Christians. She recently was talking shit to him on Instagram, so she can talk about that as much as she wants.
Okay, so I honestly have not kept up with Cafe Anderson or like have been aware of what he's been up to. But I guess like in the last few years, he's kind of had this turn towards country music, which I don't think he started out doing. And I can't help but feel like he's trying to basically copy what Skillet is now doing, except for like doing it like way, way worse.
Yeah.
He actually had a song kind of go viral, and I think it went viral on TikTok. It's called Mr. Red, White, and Blue. And it's basically like he says it's like a song for our troops, but it's really more for like fascists to jack off to while they're thinking about Trump, like pretty much. And then he also just released a song that's called, I can't remember what it's called, but like the chorus goes, if you're happy and you know it, drink a beer.
You guys are lucky she's not singing the melody of this. It makes it so much worse.
No, it's like literally, if you're happy and you know it, drink a beer. Like it's literally just taking that like nursery rhyme and like putting beer into it. It's like so, I can't even describe to you guys how like utterly cringy it is.
Because when your son died, he didn't die forever. Put him in a tomb and 3 days later. If you're happy and you know it, drink a beer. And his 18th birthday was the day he was born.
But anyways, for some reason, I think I stumbled upon him on Instagram again. And I was like, oh shit, I forgot Cafe Anderson was like a thing.
Yeah.
Like I forgot that he exists at all. And so I think I commented something like, you know, basically saying this is just music for fascists this is like fetish music for fascists. And then he actually replied to me and kind of insinuated that I'm fat, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's what he was saying. He like made some sort of comment about one of my other posts, and he was suggesting that I'm making like fat fetish porn, basically. So I'm like, it's good to know that Cafe Anderson is still the horrible, bigoted piece of shit that he was when we saw him at our college.
Yeah. The former escort. A woman once came to our chapel and spoke about how she was sexually abused when she was young and how this led her to becoming an escort for many years in her life. Eventually, she miraculously found Jesus, stopped being a sex worker, and now toured the United States speaking about her conversion. One detail of her story, which Taylor actually had to remind me of, was that at some point in her life, she was regularly tormented by demons because of her terrible sin. Yeah, this story of hers was more about escaping sin than it was about escaping abuse, which is pretty typical of evangelical conversion stories and the moral messages surrounding them. She said she would regularly wake up in the middle of the night and be just unable to move. Then a demon or demons would present themselves to her and torment her as she lay there totally immobile, unable to scream, totally helpless. And this was punishment for her sin. In fact, I suppose she had picked up these demons kind of like STDs, I guess, while she was doing sex work. I'm bringing Taylor back for the end of this one because she was there for all of this.
Yeah. So after this lady spoke, I remember you and I had a conversation where you said, like, because you had suffered sleep paralysis as a child, or maybe you still were at the time too. I think
I've had a lot in my life. Yeah.
Okay. And also we're studying psychology. You're like, everything that she's describing is literally just sleep paralysis. Like it's textbook sleep paralysis, and she's attributing it to demons, even though there's very like rational scientific understandings of what's happening to her. And I feel like we both kind of like came away from her whole talk thinking like, I mean, she seems like she's really like jumping to conclusions, and it just seems like there's more obvious reasons to why this is going on. And maybe she feels guilt over what she did in her past and is now kind of rationalizing her current experience as something demonic when she doesn't really need to be doing that. But I think that experience kind of made us a little bit more skeptical of the people that were coming to speak at chapel, because we had some like weird characters for sure.
Moving on from chapel, my school was notorious for having a lot of weirdos. And by that, people mostly meant neurodivergent people who liked to wear capes or fancy hats or dressed like Tolkien characters. And I have to say, I joined in shaming these people when I was in college. And now that I've grown up, realize these people are actually cool. Like, unironically, these people were actually cool to me now, adult Drew. I wish I could have been as cool as them back then. So instead of talking about those weirdos who should be praised, let's talk about some actual freaks on my campus. My racist student boss. I worked a telemarketing job for the school for a few semesters, and I had a supervisor who was a student who was actually a little bit younger than me, and he was a shitbag. He was the biggest kiss ass anyone had ever met. When Trump was in the primaries, this is at the tail end of my college experience, this dude loved Trump, and he grew up to be a total MAGA guy to this day. When one of my white student coworkers said the N-word very loudly and openly while we were all working together, he just laughed. The thing that really clinched it for Taylor and I, though, was that one time when we were at work, he started talking about how he was moving into a new apartment complex and that he really liked this apartment complex. He said, "You know what I really like about my new place? There's not a lot of black people." Like, we had a black coworker with us at that present moment when he said that. Like, it's wrong either way. Don't get me wrong on that. But the insanity of just thinking that it's cool to say that, like, to the black coworker and not even second guessing yourself. I'll admit that I basically just froze. I turned super red and was like, what do I even say to that? And I ended up saying something along the lines of this very misguided way of approaching this. Oh, you didn't mean to say that, right? You didn't mean that. You just mean, like, you don't want, there's just, like, not bad people there. Like, I kind of was, like, trying to almost smooth over the situation by giving him an out, even though I thought what he said was wrong. Yeah. I wish I had confronted that in a way that actually made sense and held him accountable, but 20-year-old Drew did not do that. But yeah, after thinking about this for a long time, I finally have some words for him today. So if you're watching this, from the bottom of my heart, fuck you, you vile racist shitbag. Trump is never going to let you hit, and you look like Chuck E. Cheese if they shaved him. The prophetess professor. There was a professor at my school who was quite powerful and notoriously judgmental and fake nice. She is no longer at the school, just letting you guys know that. So I'm a major night owl. I was in college, and to the extent that my friends sometimes called me the vampire because I only really came out at night and I sparkle in the sun. And there was basically an extremely heavy black curtain around my bed to shut out light. Because of the way my body just naturally works and I cannot change, I scheduled all of my classes so that I never had anything before 10 a.m. This worked perfectly fine for me. I got along with most of my teachers and I got good grades, so I thought that it was cool. It was so cool, in fact, that I was one of the top students in the psychology department while I was there. And yet, this professor once told me that I would never amount to anything if I did not join the real world and shift my sleep schedule and take early morning classes and then get up early for my job after college. Later, I discovered that she believed, and apparently told some people, that she possessed the gift of a kind of divine discernment. So she used this divine discernment to make decisions about students, like who got into different programs and how to write curriculums and how to talk to students like me. But unfortunately, it turns out that she was actually a false prophetess, because I'm doing pretty well, and a lot of other students that she judged harshly with her prophetic powers are also doing well. So, what did the Bible say we do to false prophets? Okay, I would be remiss if I did not include some good things about my college experience, because believe it or not, after all of this, despite all of the crazy stuff I've talked about, I actually really, really enjoyed college. Overall, the academics at this school were actually quite good. The core subjects were all very solid. Their STEM specialties were very good. My main psychology professor was, again, the best teacher that I've ever had in anything. And I've actually had some very good teachers, so there's real competition there. And she's now the dean of the psychology department, which is a serious asset to the school. I hope that for the school's sake, she stays there forever. And I kind of envy the students who get to learn under her again. I would actually love to take more classes from her because she was great. My academic advisor, that professor, even became a friend and personally helped me with some personality issues I had developed because of my upbringing. I had a lot of resentment of other people and a lot of insecurities and defensiveness around certain characteristics of myself. And when one day I opened up and presented this stuff to her, which I'm not going to tell you guys, and she took it so seriously and met me where I was in a way that my own family had never really done on these issues at all. And her discussion with me, just sitting down in her office over this, was quite literally a turning point for me in my life, in, I think, developing my personal character in a much more positive direction than I was as kind of a person dealing with a lot of anger, having grown up in fundamentalism. My astronomy class was so good, as you guys might know. It did definitely spark my deconstruction in a way that few other things did. But I think it really changed my life for the better. And I love the professor. As a person, the professor is awesome. I actually have gotten to visit him. I think it was a couple years ago, and I spoke to him, and he's doing really well in life, and I'm really excited and happy for him. He actually reminds me of another evangelical Christian that I really like and respect, and that's Francis Collins. He did not let faith and science get in the way of each other, in the way that his faith, I think, was a really healthy thing for him in his life. And the way he did science was not compromised by his faith. And that's something that I see Francis Collins doing. And so he actually kind of looks like Francis Collins now that I think of it. But astronomy professor at my school, and that class, just awesome. Most importantly, though, I had amazing college friends. I was terrified, really terrified, of leaving home and going to school, having grown up so sheltered and homeschooled. And the reason why I decided to conquer that fear and stay, and then had an overall good experience in school, is primarily because of the great friends that I made. Like, if I loved going to school for any reason, it was because of the incredible friends that I had that loved and supported me throughout the entire experience. Finally, let's talk about a couple of things that happened after graduation. Not long after I graduated in December of 2015, I left Christianity for a bunch of intellectual reasons, philosophical reasons that I have detailed in other videos. You can go watch those. When I left Christianity, I distanced myself from all of my dear, dear college friends because I didn't want to become a pet project. And I knew that they would want to, talk me back into following the Lord precisely because they cared about me and the fate of my eternal soul so much. So, I isolated myself from them, and that was really painful. I kept my deconversion a secret from everyone but my wife for a year. Really intense process of maintaining that secrecy. But eventually, I was essentially forced to reveal all of it to my immediate family. And a part of their response was to say and believe that I had obviously been miseducated by non-Christians in college, which was ridiculous, and I told them as much. I don't really know that they believed me, though. Sometime after this, I came out as an atheist totally publicly. I told all of my friends from college, and none of them, not a single one, did anything whatsoever to mistreat me. The one person who did decide to be like, I want to have a conversation with you about why you should believe in the gospel, asked for consent to do that. And the conversation was fine. And then we didn't stay on that. We just continue to be friends, and we're still friends. And he sends me tons of really crazy shit on Instagram to this day. Within a few years of me leaving the faith, almost all of my friends from college either became progressive Christians who, I would have no reason to have any kind of problem with about anything, or left Christianity altogether, like I did. So I, again, had reason to feel very fortunate to have all of these people in my life. And if any of you are watching this all the way at the end of this video, I love and appreciate you so much. Thank you for treating me like a human being when we were not always really trained to do that with apostates. So in my last semester, a big thing happened in the school and consequently in the city, and it landed me my first job directly out of college. I found a way to kind of legally take money from our cafeteria, essentially our cafeteria catering service on campus, and get them to sign a bunch of it over to be donated to a homeless shelter so that they could buy food. And the scheme worked. I basically made the cafeteria people believe that they were going to look really, really good in the city's newspaper for donating less than $1,000. And eventually, my friends and I were able to raise, it's complicated, but raise over $8,000, which then went to buy food wholesale, which went directly to the biggest homeless shelter in the city. It got front page news of the newspaper of the just really small city, so it's not that big of a deal. But I was really proud of that. And then I got my first job out of college because the homeless shelter thought that it was cool that I would do that. And I had a degree that was applicable to working at a homeless shelter. So I did that. Actually really, really liked that job, even though I was a stealth atheist working at an evangelical Christian homeless shelter. And I almost got fired for being a stealth atheist. If you guys want that full story, let me know. Maybe I'll make a whole video story time about my first job out of college. All right, thank you so much for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support, and praise be unto Our Lady, River, the savior of this channel and my top patron. If you want to support my work, subscribe, share this video, and support me on Patreon. That's really the best way you can do it. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.